For the past several months, there have been almost daily reports about the financial crisis gripping Europe. Members of the European Union have been working to avert a financial meltdown. Can the European Union withstand the current uncharted waters? And why should Americans care about what happens over there? That's the focus of today's discussion on The Professors. The European Union began right after World War II. It was formed as a way to protect France, which had been invaded twice by Germany.
French economists realized that if they traded with Germany, had close ties with Germany after World War II, that it was less likely that Germany would attack France.
Nick Panamitros is a professor at Kennedy King College, UIC, and Harper College. He says in the beginning, France and Germany started trading coal and steel, and then the EU grew from there.
The European Union started expanding more so in the 50s, into the 60s, 70s, and with the help of de Gaulle and some of the post-World War II leaders.
Some of those leaders had visions of turning the European Union into a supranational entity, but that idea quickly collapsed.
If you ever go to a European soccer game, you'll understand the rivalry, the cultural differences between the European countries, and perhaps one of the reasons why it has failed.
Professor Panamitros believed the European Union is facing the same challenges the United States faced with the Articles of Confederation back in 1776.
I feel that the European Union currently is on very, very shaky ground and might see its demise, or might exist as some remnant of what it was, say, 10 years ago, or what it is today.
Some question the need for a European Union, but if it were to collapse, would that lead to war?
There is always that possibility of increase of war, not necessarily immediately afterwards, however, a decade, 2 decades, because you no longer have that closeness and understanding.
The economic downturn in the U.S. has affected markets around the globe, including the Eurozone. Conversely, the financial crisis in Europe has impacted Wall Street, demonstrating just how interconnected we all are.
This European Union, if it fails or continues to have problems, is going to have an impact on the United States, there's no question, and on the whole world and global markets.
Reporting for The Professors on WYCC TV, I'm Aaron Lee.
From across the city and the 7 city colleges of Chicago, broadcasting from 63rd and Halsted at Kennedy King College, The Professors, taking the art of conversation to a higher degree.
Many scholars see the current European crisis as leading not only to the loss of the euro as a currency, but the likely disintegration of the European Union itself. We discuss the European crisis today on The Professors. Joining us today are Professors Antonio Vasquez from Wilbur Wright College, and from Kennedy King College, Ted Williams, and also Pamela Canamaray. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Thank you.
We saw the package right now at the beginning of the program, comparing the European Union, its situation being very similar to the situation of the United States with the Articles of Confederation. And I'd like to start the conversation maybe using a comparison type basis with our history. Ted, do you think that the European Union is going to be able to reshape itself and make better?
Well, with the comparison to the Articles of Confederation, the main problem with the Articles of Confederation was that there was the central government through those articles was ultimately too weak because all of the states wanted to retain a level of sovereignty. And so what you find with the European Union, the real challenge with the European Union is that in monetary policy they have some consistency. But when it comes to fiscal policy, i.e. what their governments are actually doing and how they're spending money, they have a plethora of different ways they approach this. They've got different languages, different cultures, and then obviously different governments. So given all of that, the way that our Constitution was needed to bring together a sense of unity and a strong central government without, on top of the Articles of Confederation, because it wouldn't have worked in the same way, the European Union as it stands, many people had many great hopes for it. We're seeing now that it's really in trouble, especially obviously with this financial crisis. And so to answer your question, as you've said yourself, I agree with you. I think that the EU is in a lot of trouble right now.
I would have to go into tie to the ideas from the Articles of Confederation. There were a couple of big issues at the time. One was that, of course, no state was using a unified currency. So that you didn't have a currency of the United States. You had a currency for the state of Massachusetts, Connecticut. And just like the European economies, you have the ability to use one principle from economics of seigniorage. That is, you have a contract that's out there for $100, let's say. You only collect $90 in taxes. As a government, what you can see in Greece and Italy is you can print enough money so that you pass it out to people. So the money has the value of $100, but you only collected 90 in tax. So it pushes up inflation. So the next year you set a contract for 110. You only have 100 in tax, so you raise prices again, and you keep doing this. It allows the government to continue to buy the services it needs and pushes the cost in terms of inflation on the typical consumer. And with the Articles of Confederation, we went to a unified currency. So that's exactly what they need to do, is unify politically to amplify what Ted said. That is imperative. Otherwise, they won't have the same abilities to unify behind their currency. And the other thing is, of course, if you look at the social norms that Ted talked about, you have wide disparities in retirement ages. In Germany, you're looking at 63 to 65 for retirement. In Greece, you're looking at 50 years for an early retirement. Why should I, as a German national, work for extra 15 years to bail out the Greek economy that allows somebody to retire so early compared to me? But so you've got these different social norms and customs that now are the same problem we face with the different states in the U.S., where we just agreed to abide by one central set of laws.
But didn't the Germans already know when they bought into this that these countries, they call them the pigs countries, Portugal, Ireland, Greece, and Spain, had these issues, and that they would be having disparity in retirement age? I mean, why would the Germans buy into this?
Because the economy was good. Everything was growing. Things were positive. And they'd all agreed on a convergence of their economies. They were going to shrink their deficits, that is how much extra they spend above what they collect, to converge to 3%, so they would all behave similarly. But
and also, I think European history is very relevant in this as well, because if you look at prior to really, the last 50 or so years, the European countries have been in conflict with each other for hundreds and hundreds of years. Exactly. And so this was, the great hope of, post-World War II, that we would have a sort of a centralized European economy, and then that centralization of the economy would then foster political ties and social ties, et cetera. And the question we ask ourselves is, really, has it worked? And I would suggest that on some levels it has, because the EU actually is a very major player in the economic game in the world. They represent 20% of all the world's imports and exports, and have actually surpassed the United States in GDP. But, however, we are seeing, once again, the downside to that, and I think that is something that we're going to be seeing, and it's going to be a very negative outcome, I think, in many ways.
Pamela, do you think that this European Union needs to change, maybe become a federation, like the United States had to do?
I think it does need to change. I think in theory, initially when it was set up, as Ted was saying, that it was created regarding the aftermath of World War II, and to establish the euro as the common currency. And we see that in theory, I think it works. But some of the problems that I have read about is that what is happening in Greece really does show the true character. And as Tonia was saying about why should a German work an additional 15 years when the people in Greece can retire at 50. Also, Germany was one of the founders of the EU. And as a result, I think that they probably established some things undercurrent that is not so prevalent or just so open. And I think that there could be almost a mockery of the democratic principles that they have sought to try to establish.
And I would, on top of that, I would say that, you ask if the federal system is the best way to go on this. The Europeans will have the same challenges that America has had in federalism. Federalism is is you know, as Winston Churchill said, democracy is the best form of or the worst form of government, except for all the other ones that have been tried. Okay, federalism is the worst system, except for all the other ones that have been tried in that way. Sovereignty is a big issue. The Hungarians recently, just this past week, their prime minister came out and was really talking about how he felt the EU was meddling in, you know, in Hungarian affairs, and they're really concerned about their sovereignty. That's why the United States has really never engaged in that kind of alliance with people on a long-term level. So whether an American-style federal system will work in the EU remains to be seen. As long as countries like Hungary and others are worried about their sovereignty, it will not work.
And I would say that it's based in social context. That when you look at a famous person in the U.S. history, Tip O'Neill, who was Speaker of the House for decades, he had that famous phrase that all politics is local. Right, and that is whether it's a national level, you see going in and appealing to the desires of households to achieve this part of the American dream. But that's just it. We have an American dream. We have a unifying set of principles that go through all of our communities on what we expect and seek as Americans. But with the EU, their expectations are all over the map. There is no EU identity. We're looking at its formation slowly with the newest generation. But until that is coalesced, it'll be difficult to get everybody to agree on the basic principles, as you said, because it'll be impossible, as the panelist said, because you have so many different entities out there trying to go for what they believe is right, and there's no one definition of that.
Well, you have a lot of, I'm sorry, you have a lot of cultural differences amongst the members, the 27 members of the EU, and with the 13 original colonies, you know, they were much more homogenous in culture.
Sure.
And they never had fought against each other also. Here you have countries that have historically been enemies, cultural differences, language barriers. So was it a little premature, do you feel, to start this currency before you actually had political unity? I mean, there is no executor of the EU. They have no army. Their legislature is there, but it's not very strong. So was it premature to start a currency
I don't know if
before?
it's premature, but I do think that I see this 80%, this 80-20 principle, where you have 20% of the 27 countries, the 20% making 80% of the decisions. And the founders, when it was established in, I believe it was in 1961 when the EU was established. Formally established, that you only had 4 countries participating, and I think they laid the foundation. And I think those 4 founding nations of the EU are pretty much running everything, even though they have invited these other nations to be a part. I don't know if it was premature to start.
I would agree with Pamela as well on this. I wouldn't say that it was a premature start. I mean, this has been 50 years or so in the making here.
Well, I said the currency.
Yeah, okay, gotcha.
You know, getting the currency going before you really have unity, you know, political and economic otherwise.
But I would say that, as Antonio was saying as well, that, you know, it's one thing when things are, it's like a marriage. One thing, things are going well. And then when you start having the rocky times, then, you know, maybe we'll do our next show on marriage, and we, you know, we can talk about that.
Divorce.
Right, and divorce. Right. What are you talking about? Right, exactly. Right.
Deeply in love.
Exactly. Yes, I am. But so what I'm saying is that after the Greek financial crisis, and we saw that begin to kind of, you know, make its way. Well, actually, after the U.S. financial crisis, and that trickled into sort of the European situation. You know, we've had literally in the past year and a half, there have been 9 different governments that have changed their leadership facing this economic crisis, and the most significant one besides Greece has been Italy. And Italy being the 3rd largest economy in the Eurozone, their failure is a huge thing. And so the point is that the EU now is spending all this money on trying to bail them out and trying to bail the Greeks out, that sort of thing. And, you know, like in America, we had companies, you know, that were, you know, I guess too big to fail. It's kind of a similar situation, if you will. The point is that in good times, yes. In bad times, now the EU is going through these growing pains, and they're trying to figure out, are we going to be able to sustain any level of unity? And that unity is going to cost us a lot of money. It's going to cost us a lot of political capital. And now we're starting to see the rubber meet the road here, and we're really having some challenges. And this is where either they will grow through this and get better, or the EU is going to cease to exist as we know it.
I'd like to take a different tack on it. That is, that if you were to go into a country and say you're going to vote away all your political sovereignty to this group called the EU, Oh, hell no. But if we're going to join a currency, then I will buy into that. But that joining of the currency then forces the political, forces the economic ties. Because if you ask people if they're going to give over their willingness to their rights over their own country, their land, their human rights, how they're defined, they're not going to transfer that over to some other party. But you say, oh yeah, we're going to develop a nice little currency. It's going to make it so you're going to be able to trade with Pamela's country. You're going to be able to trade with Antonio's country. We're going to drop all the trade barriers. Oh, now you've presented the upsides. You haven't presented the downsides. And strategically, like game theory always in economics, you have to think the sequence of games, the possible outcomes. The optimal strategy is to bring in with the currency, then the other forces will push the integration along the other capacities.
But what we've seen, say for instance with NAFTA, with the United States and Mexico and Canada, is that even those hopes did not come necessarily to fruition. So we had sort of economic integration through NAFTA, but that political disagreement, the political acrimony that exists is very much still there. It's alive and kicking. So, in theory, yeah, it works, but in reality, unfortunately, it hasn't necessarily, shown itself to be true.
Okay, so do you think that with this reshaping of the governments of Europe, there's been, in Greece, new government, 2 new governments, more recent. Do you think with the reshaping that this experiment, the EU, is going to be able to survive?
I don't know. With the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, making the decisions to bail Greece out, and this is the second bailout for Greece, that the problem with that is that you have the people who run the money, and then the bailout that they're doing is to pay the creditors, not necessarily to help the working people of Greece. And so they are supporting the banks, the institutions, the big corporations that said, yes, be a part of EU so that we can trade. And I think that's the issue, that you have the monetary, financial prime ministers who are in control of the monies, making the decisions for those nations.
And one of the big things I would suggest is that austerity it doesn't seem to be working. Obviously, it's very politically unpopular. As well, you look at the United States' recent financial crisis, austerity was really kind of the opposite of what we did on the federal level. I mean, we pumped all this money in through stimulus, and many people believe that is really what has helped to stabilize our economy now. So the Europeans are facing some very serious challenges in that way, and not having that sort of, as Antonio mentioned, this unifying force, this overarching leadership, that sort of thing that is committed to consistent principles, it's very difficult to get past that. I do want to speak to something else on this question, if you wouldn't mind for a moment. One of the things I find to be very culturally interesting about Europe is what has been known as the demographic winter. And there's a cool documentary out about this right now, about the increasing age of the Europeans, the reduction in birth rates of the Europeans, and also the increase in immigration, and how all of those forces are coming together, they're coalescing, and sort of creating this environment in which Europe economically is really suffering, because the working population of Europeans is increasingly shrinking, and they're really having to rely on immigrant labor. And as a result of that, there are all these other tensions that come as a result. And so Europe is very, very interesting in that way, and similar to the U.S. in terms of the challenge of the Social Security system. Because if you don't have a lot of younger people who are working, then all of the pressure of the financial system falls on on those few that are doing it, and that's a real challenge.
I would agree with Ted on that issue. In economics, we study what's called demography, where we look at the economic trends of populations. And one of the things that you can go and Google it up and take a look at on a map is called the total fertility rate. That is the number of children born per woman of childbearing years. And if you look at the EU, it's less than 2, it's close to 1, so that you have less native-born Europeans. Now, you also saw this trend in the United States. Some economists attribute the influx of immigrants to the high number of birth control and abortions chosen. Why? Because those would have been teenagers that would have taken low-wage jobs. Instead, it brings foreigners both into the U.S. and into the EU, which puts domestic pressures on what the social context of those benefits you'll receive. Now, in terms of the whole IMF issue, that has always been debated, even among economists, that When you go in and do basically one of these packages like Greece, asking them to make all these sacrifices, it's like telling somebody, oh, well, the best way to become healthy is to starve yourself. And it becomes very counterintuitive. You're trying to basically take away all the things that we would do in a stimulative effect in the U.S. economy to be able to reach that healthier outcome.
And what's also counterintuitive in this whole demographic conversation is the idea, and this is, you know, it's so funny in I think the world we live in today, people believe that the less people we have in the country, the better off the country's going to be. And that is completely incorrect, and the Europeans are seeing this. In fact, the two fastest growing economies in the world are China and India, the place with the largest populations. And so what you see is that, and I agree with you, and you know, we're not talking about this, but years of birth control, abortions, and those sorts of things culturally have taken their toll, people not being married and that sort of thing in Europe, and they've taken their toll on the European population, and I think we're seeing that, and I think honestly to bring this home, if we don't begin to address some cultural issues in our country, we're going to see the same thing here.
Do you think that the Europeans, when they were very optimistic, say 20 years ago, about this unification and monetary system, do you think they had in mind or understood that you're going to be having immigrants coming into the country and a dilution of your homogeneity? Do you think they thought that was going to be the case?
No. The most popular name for a baby being born in Europe now is Muhammad. Just you know, it's an amazing thing.
And it just goes on with the basic idea of opportunity cost, that when you have two mothers, one that is lower educated, earns $20,000 a year, one that's got a master's degree and is earning $100,000 a year, and you have the decision, do I take off 3 years off work in order to go out and have 2 children? Well, I could give up $60,000 for that low-wage mom that earns $20,000 a year. Or I could give up $300,000 for the high-wage mom. Well, high-wage moms will simply have fewer children, and they will use that extra money that they have to be able to invest in their children, giving them all sorts of space camp, music lessons, dance lessons. And so you've got the disparity in the two groups, high income, low income, that create this natural tension that we're even observing in our country right now.
And the other lesson for us is the weight of the public sector has been unsustainable for the Europeans. And we have got to learn this lesson as well. You know, the federal government is the largest employer in the United States. And I'm all for the federal government doing, you know, and I'm not, you know, completely under this, you know, the Tea Party model of little or no government. But I do recognize that they do have a point here, that we cannot continue to spend without consequences. And the more government benefits that we have all across the board, I don't demonize people in saying this. I mean, it's not just the people on welfare that are causing the budget crisis. It's the people on welfare, plus the size of the military, plus the Social Security system, plus et cetera,
and the corporate,
et cetera.
the people on
and
corporate welfare.
welfare as well. And let me not forget them for sure. But the point is, it is unsustainable. You cannot continue to spend with a credit card and never pay the bill.
We have only a few minutes left. On that note, I'd like to maybe ask each one of you, do you feel, Antonio, that there will be a loss of European currency, or do you think that the European Union is going to totally collapse and there won't be any European Union at all?
I know many economists from its founding, including Milton Friedman, I believe both eventually believe this whole system would collapse, that their independent autonomy and their desire to have control over their own economy would eventually lead to its disintegration. And I still concur that that would be the path that I see in the long run. It's all politics is local. If you got to get yourself elected, you have to do what's best for your country. And I don't see that anything has changed over the last 20 years to have them believe in this unified spirit of the EU.
Ted, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, piggyback off of what he said, it's the exact situation that we have. We have one nationally elected office in this country, and that's the president. Everyone else is working for their own constituents. And so this is what will happen, has happened in Europe. The cultural trends, I think, here's the biggest thing I think that as Americans we can learn from this, is we can look at the cultural trends that have caused some of this and look at the governmental political trends that have caused this. And if we can learn those lessons, then this will be of benefit to us. But if we don't, because America has followed Europe in many, many social trends historically, and we could go through if we have more time to talk about that.
Progressive era and everything
absolutely. The abolition of slavery and slavery to begin with, a number of things. But the point is, overall, that we must learn and we must take lessons from our European neighbors, or we will suffer the same fate.
Good.
And my final thought, I take it biblically. 1 Timothy chapter 2, pray for your leaders. Pray for your leadership so that the people will live peaceably. It is important that we live in peace, and we have to pray for those people in charge.
Thank you for joining us. See you next time on The Professors.